The rain hammered Neo-Singapore like bullets from heaven, each drop carrying the weight of Joren Blackwood's failures. He pressed deeper into the maintenance tunnel, his engineer's mind still calculating water pressure and structural integrity even as his world had collapsed 3 months ago. The tunnel's metal walls wept condensation, creating a symphony of drips that reminded him of his team's final moments aboard the Aurora station. Joren had been the lead designer for humanity's most ambitious spacecraft. The Aurora was meant to carry the first human colonists beyond the solar system. Instead, it became a tomb for 12 brilliant minds, including his best friend Cade and the woman he had planned to marry, Vera. The investigation blamed design flaws in the gravity stabilization system. His flaws, his calculations, his responsibility. The corporate tribunal had been swift and merciless. They stripped him of his engineering license, froze his assets, and left him with nothing but the clothes on his back and a mind that replayed the explosion every waking moment. The media painted him as the architect of humanity's greatest space disaster. Friends became strangers overnight. His family disowned him to protect their own reputations. Now he lived like a ghost beneath the gleaming towers of Neo-Singapore, in the forgotten arteries that kept the city alive. The tunnel system stretched for kilometers, housing the massive pipes and cables that fed the metropolis above. Most people never thought about what lay beneath their feet. For Joren, it had become the only place where he could exist without judgment. Thunder rolled overhead, shaking dust from the tunnel ceiling. Through a rusted grate, he could see the storm tearing through the city's upper levels. The weather control systems had failed again, allowing nature to reclaim the sky for a few precious hours. Joren found strange comfort in the chaos. At least the storm was honest about its destructive power. A sound cut through the thunder, something that made him freeze. It was small, desperate, and utterly alien. A keening cry that spoke of pain and loneliness in a language older than words. Joren followed the sound deeper into the tunnel system, his bare feet splashing through puddles of runoff water. He found the source near a junction where several maintenance shafts converged. Huddled against a massive water pipe was a creature that shouldn't exist. The dragon hatchling was no bigger than a house cat. Its scales, the deep blue-black of a storm cloud, shot through with veins of silver lightning. One wing hung at an awkward angle, clearly broken. Its eyes were the color of electric sapphires, filled with intelligence and desperate fear. Joren had seen the reports, of course. 3 years ago, the first dragons had appeared during the Great Storm that nearly destroyed half of Southeast Asia. They emerged from rifts in the sky itself, magnificent beings that defied every law of physics and biology. Most were massive creatures capable of leveling city blocks. The government had declared them hostile and begun a systematic hunting campaign. But this one was just a baby, injured and alone. As Joren knelt beside it, the hatchling tried to crawl away but collapsed from the effort. Its breathing was rapid and shallow. Without proper care, it would die within hours. Every rational part of Joren's mind screamed warnings. Harboring a dragon was treason punishable by death. The creature might grow to destroy everything he touched, just like his spacecraft design. He should walk away, report the location to the authorities, and let them handle it. Instead, he reached out slowly with one hand. The hatchling flinched, but didn't retreat. When Joren's fingertips touched its scaled snout, he felt a spark pass between them. Not electric, but something deeper. Recognition. Understanding. 2 broken beings finding each other in the darkness. Tempest, he whispered, the name rising unbidden from some deep well of memory. Your name is Tempest. The dragon's eyes widened, and for just a moment, the storm outside seemed to quiet. Joren gathered the small creature against his chest, feeling its rapid heartbeat synchronize with his own. The hatchling was warm despite the cold tunnel, its scales smooth as polished stone. carrying Tempest deeper into the maze of tunnels. Joren felt something he had thought died with the aurora. Purpose. This small, impossible creature needed him, and for the first time in months, he had a reason to keep breathing. The guilt and shame were still there, heavy as gravity, but now they shared space with something else. Hope. He found an abandoned electrical junction room, its walls lined with dead monitors and silent control panels. Using his jacket as a makeshift nest, Joren settled Tempest in the warmest corner. The hatchling's wing needed setting, but he had no medical supplies, no knowledge of dragon anatomy. He would have to improvise, the way he had learned to improvise everything in his new underground existence. As he worked to stabilize the broken wing with strips torn from his shirt, Tempest watched him with those brilliant blue eyes. The dragon never tried to bite or scratch, seeming to understand that Joren was trying to help. When the improvised splint was in place, the hatchling pressed its head against Joren's palm and made a sound like distant thunder mixed with a cat's purr. Outside, the storm began to fade, but inside the forgotten room beneath the city, something new was beginning. Two outcasts, one human and one dragon, starting the long journey back from the edge of despair. 2 weeks had passed since Joren found Tempest in the tunnels. The dragon hatchling had grown remarkably fast, now the size of a medium dog with scales that shimmered like liquid starlight. The broken wing had healed cleanly, though Tempest still favored it when stretching. More importantly, the little dragon had begun to trust completely, following Joren through the underground maze with the devotion of a loyal companion. Joren had fashioned a crude harness from salvaged cables, allowing Tempest to ride on his shoulders during their daily scavenging runs. The dragon's presence had changed everything. Where once Joren moved through the tunnels like a specter haunting his own existence, now he had purpose. He needed to find food for both of them, secure materials to improve their shelter, and most critically, keep Tempest hidden from the surface world that wanted all dragons dead. The crisis came on a Tuesday morning when Tempest fell ill. The dragon had been listless for days, refusing the scraps of meat Joren brought from the surface. Now Tempest lay curled in their makeshift nest, breathing in short, labored gasps. His scales had lost their luster, fading to a dull gray that reminded Joren too much of death. Desperation drove Joren deeper into the tunnel system than he had ever ventured. He had heard rumors of someone who helped the forgotten people living in the underground. A medic who asked no questions and demanded no payment beyond what people could afford. Finding her meant risking exposure, but watching Tempest suffer was worse than any personal danger. He found Nira Voss in a converted water treatment chamber 3 levels down from his usual territory. The space had been transformed into a surprisingly sophisticated medical facility, with clean white walls, proper lighting powered by tapped city lines, and equipment that looked both expensive and illegal. Nira herself was not what Joren had expected. She was perhaps 30 years old, with short auburn hair and green eyes that held the steady confidence of someone who had seen every kind of suffering the city could produce. She looked up from treating a man's infected wound when Joren entered carrying Tempest wrapped in his jacket. For a long moment, she simply stared at the bundle in his arms. When Tempest's head emerged, scales catching the light, Nira's expression shifted from surprise to something approaching wonder. "Is that what I think it is?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. Joren nodded, unable to find words. He had practiced explanations during the long walk down, but faced with another human being who might judge him, his carefully rehearsed speeches died in his throat. Nira finished bandaging her patient and sent him away with antibiotics and strict instructions about wound care. Only when they were alone did she approach Joren and his unusual companion. Tempest raised his head weakly, electric blue eyes studying this new human with cautious intelligence. "He's beautiful," Nira whispered, extending one hand slowly. Tempest sniffed her fingers. then allowed her to stroke the ridge above his eyes. "And very sick. Bring him here." She led them to an examination table, her movements gentle but efficient. As she checked Tempest's breathing, heart rate, and general condition, she asked careful questions about the dragon's diet, behavior, and living conditions. Joren found himself telling her everything. The crash, his exile, finding Tempest in the storm, their life together in the tunnels. "He's malnourished," Nira concluded after her examination. "Dragons aren't meant to eat scraps and garbage. They need specific minerals, rare metals even. Their biology is unlike anything we understand." She paused, studying Joren with those penetrating green eyes. "You know keeping him is treason. They execute people for less." "I know," Joren said quietly. "But I can't abandon him. He saved me as much as I saved him." Something in his voice must have convinced her. Nira moved to a locked cabinet and withdrew several vials of supplements and a bag of what looked like metallic powder. Iron filings, copper shavings, and trace amounts of rare earth elements. "Mix a teaspoon into his food twice daily. The vitamins will help with the transition." She handed him the supplies, then hesitated. "I studied xenobiology before the dragons appeared. Always wondered what it would be like to actually treat one." She looked at Tempest, who was already showing more alertness. "Would you bring him back in a week? I'd like to monitor his progress." That weekly appointment became the foundation of something neither Joren nor Nira had expected. As Tempest's health improved, their conversations grew longer, deeper. Nira told him about her past as a military doctor, her disgust with the government's brutal anti-dragon policies, her decision to help the underground community rather than serve a system she could no longer believe in. Joren found himself opening up about his work on the Aurora, the guilt that ate at him daily, his struggle to find meaning in a life that seemed cursed to bring destruction. Nira listened without judgment, her medical training making her comfortable with pain in all its forms. "You didn't kill those people," she told him one evening as they watched. Tempest practiced flying in the large chamber that served as her clinic. The dragon was graceful in the air now, his scales gleaming with health and vitality. "Accidents happen in cutting-edge technology. The fact that you blame yourself shows you have a conscience, not that you're a monster. Tell that to their families," Joren replied. But the words lacked the sharp edge of self-hatred that had defined them for months. Their relationship deepened gradually, built on shared care for Tempest and growing trust in each other. The first time Nira kissed him, it was after Tempest had successfully hunted a tunnel rat, proving his recovery was complete. They stood together watching the dragon eat, and when Joren turned to thank her again for saving his companion's life, she silenced him with soft lips and warm hands that tasted like hope. "I never thought I'd feel this again," she whispered against his mouth. "After losing so much faith in humanity, you and Tempest reminded me that connection is still possible." Their romance bloomed in the hidden spaces beneath the city, stolen moments between medical emergencies and the constant vigilance required to keep Tempest safe. They made love for the first time in her private quarters, a small room behind the clinic where she had built a life of service and solitude. Tempest curled up on a cushion nearby, apparently approving of this development in his human's relationship. But happiness in their underground world was fragile. Captain Thane's security forces had begun systematic sweeps of the tunnel system, following reports of dragon sightings. The captain was a career military officer who had built his reputation hunting the great dragons that threatened the surface. The idea of one living beneath his city was an insult he intended to correct with extreme prejudice. Nira brought the warning during one of their evening meetings. "They're getting closer. 3 levels up, checking every junction. We need to move you and Tempest somewhere safer." Joren felt the old weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Once again, his presence was bringing danger to someone he cared about. "Maybe I should take him and leave the city entirely. Find somewhere remote where he can grow up in peace," "No," Nira said firmly, taking his hands in hers. "Running isn't the answer. We build something better here, together. There are others like us, people who believe the dragons aren't just monsters to be destroyed. It's time to stop hiding and start fighting for what's right." Tempest, now nearly the size of a large dog and far more intelligent than any animal had a right to be, seemed to understand the gravity of their situation. He pressed against both of them, a low harmonic rumble emerging from his throat that spoke of loyalty and determination. Looking into Nira's eyes, Joren saw the same fire that had once driven him to reach for the stars. Perhaps it was time to remember that falling didn't have to mean staying down. Perhaps love could be the foundation for something greater than mere survival. The hunt was closing in, but they would not face it alone. The abandoned subway station had been dead for 30 years, its platforms cracked and overgrown with bioluminescent fungi that cast an eerie blue glow through the cavernous space. Joren ran his hands along the support pillars, his engineer's mind automatically calculating load distributions and structural integrity. This place could work. It had to work. Tempest had grown again, now nearly the size of a motorcycle, with wings that could span 12 feet when fully extended. His scales had deepened to a rich storm blue that rippled with veins of electric silver when he was excited or threatened. More importantly, his intelligence had blossomed beyond anything Joren had imagined possible. The dragon understood spoken language, could solve complex puzzles, and had even begun to show rudimentary problem-solving skills that bordered on engineering intuition. Nira emerged from the shadowy tunnels, leading 3 figures Joren had never seen before. The first was Zara, a young street artist whose illegal murals had been appearing throughout the lower city levels. Her face was streaked with paint and defiance, her eyes burning with the kind of idealism that could move mountains or get people killed. Behind her came 2 tunnel dwellers Nira had been treating, refugees from the surface who had found community in the underground. "This is it," Nira announced, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Our sanctuary." Over the following weeks, Joren threw himself into the work of transformation with an intensity he had not felt since designing the Aurora. But this time, he was building something to preserve life rather than reach for distant stars. Using salvaged materials and jury-rigged power systems, he began converting the station into a refuge that could house not just Tempest, but any other dragons that might need shelter. The main platform became a living space with carefully designed heating systems that could accommodate reptilian physiology. Joren installed water features that provided both drinking sources and humidity control. He created elevated perches at different heights, knowing instinctively that dragons would want options for rest and observation. The old ticket booth became Nira's expanded medical facility. Zara proved invaluable, her artistic eye helping to design spaces that were both functional and beautiful. She painted murals on the walls that depicted dragons and humans living in harmony, her bold strokes creating images that seemed to move in the shifting light. More practically, she had connections throughout the underground community and proved remarkably skilled at acquiring materials, without asking too many questions about their source. Tempest supervised everything with the air of a young lord overseeing the construction of his castle. He would perch on Joren's shoulder while he worked, occasionally making soft warbling sounds that Joren had learned indicated approval or suggestions for improvement. When Nira was present, Tempest would often position himself between them, his head resting against both their legs, as if claiming them as his family. The romance between Joren and Nira deepened during those intense weeks of construction. They worked side by side during the day and fell into each other's arms each night, exhausted but exhilarated by what they were building together. Nira brought out a side of Joren he had thought died with the Aurora disaster. She made him laugh again, helped him see that his engineering skills were gifts to be used for healing rather than sources of shame. "I love watching you work," she told him one evening as they sat on the platform edge. Tempest curled between them like a scaly cat. You become completely absorbed, like you're having a conversation with the universe itself. I used to feel that way about spacecraft design, Joren admitted. Before everything went wrong. I thought I had lost that forever. You never lost it, Nira said, leaning against his shoulder. You just needed to find something worth building again. There, intimate moments were stolen between work shifts and medical emergencies. They made love in the small chamber Joren had carved out behind the main platform, their bodies moving together with the same harmony they had found in their shared work. Tempest seemed to understand these times required privacy, often positioning himself as a guardian at the chamber entrance. 3 months into their sanctuary project, everything changed. Joren was installing the final components of an air filtration system when Tempest suddenly went rigid, his scales flaring bright with agitation. The dragon's head turned toward the main tunnel entrance, and he released a sound Joren had never heard before. It was deep, resonant, and carried harmonics that seemed to vibrate in his bones. From somewhere in the darkness beyond their sanctuary came an answering call. It was similar to Tempest's voice, but infinitely more powerful, a sound like thunder learning to sing. Tempest launched himself into the air, circling the station with obvious excitement, his calls becoming more frequent and urgent. When she emerged from the tunnel, Joren's breath caught in his throat. The adult dragon was magnificent beyond description. Her scales were the deep blue-black of a night sky, traced with silver patterns that resembled constellations. She was massive, easily 40 feet long, with wings that seemed to eclipse the station's lights. But her eyes, those same electric blue as Tempest's, held intelligence and emotion that made it impossible to see her as anything but a thinking, feeling being. Tempest flew to her immediately, pressing his smaller form against her neck with obvious joy. The reunion was tender and heartbreaking, a mother finding her lost child after months of searching. She nuzzled him gently, her massive head delicate as she checked him for injuries or signs of poor treatment. Then those ancient eyes turned to Joren, and he felt himself being measured by an intelligence that predated human civilization. The dragon mother approached slowly, each step deliberate and careful in the confined space. When she was close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her scales, she lowered her great head until they were at eye level. Joren felt no fear, only a profound sense of completion. This was what Tempest had been waiting for, what their entire journey had been leading toward. He reached out with one trembling hand and touched the smooth scales of her snout. The contact sent a shock of connection through him, not physical but emotional, a bridge of understanding between two very different forms of consciousness. Images flashed through his mind. Tempest falling from the sky during a storm, his mother's desperate search through the underground, her growing hope as she followed traces of his presence. And something else, a complex impression of gratitude and approval for the human who had saved her child when she could not. "We called her Seraphina," Nira whispered from beside him. She had approached during the reunion, her medical instincts overridden by simple wonder. The underground community has been tracking her movements for weeks. She's been searching for Tempest, but she never attacked anyone. She seemed to understand he was being cared for. Seraphon's presence transformed their sanctuary from a hiding place into something far more significant. Word spread through the underground community with astonishing speed. The Dragon Mother was not just tolerating human contact. She was actively protecting those who had sheltered her child. Within days, their sanctuary became a pilgrimage site for everyone who believed coexistence between humans and dragons was possible. Captain Thane's response was swift and brutal. Security forces surrounded the station's entrances, demanding the surrender of all dragons and their human collaborators. The standoff lasted 3 tense days, with news crews from the surface broadcasting images of the magnificent creatures that had previously been seen only as monsters to be destroyed. The turning point came when a group of children from the surface, led by Zara's younger sister, slipped past the security cordon to see the dragons for themselves. Seraphine's gentle interaction with the children, allowing them to touch her scales and even ride briefly on her back, was broadcast across the city's networks. Public opinion began to shift as people saw dragons not as destroyers, but as intelligent beings capable of forming bonds with humans. Captain Thane found himself facing not just a military problem, but a political crisis. The mayor, sensing the changing winds of public sentiment, ordered a withdrawal of forces and the establishment of formal negotiations. Joren, as the sanctuary's architect and Tempest's primary caretaker, found himself thrust into the role of diplomat between two species. The formal recognition of the sanctuary as neutral territory came 6 months later, but the real victory had happened much earlier. It was in the moment when Joren realized he had found his purpose again, when Nira accepted his proposal of marriage with tears streaming down her face, when Tempest learned to speak his first halting words in human language, calling Joren father and Nira mother, with the absolute conviction of a child who knows exactly where he belongs. Standing on the platform of their sanctuary, watching human children play alongside young dragons while their parents shared stories and laughter, Joren felt the last of his guilt over the Aurora finally release its grip on his heart. He had not been able to bring those 12 souls back, but he had helped create something beautiful and lasting in their memory. Nira slipped her hand into his, her wedding ring catching the light from Tempest's scales as he performed aerial tricks for the delighted children. "No regrets?" she asked softly. Joren looked around at the sanctuary they had built together, at the future they were creating one day at a time, at the family they had chosen and been chosen by. "None," he said, and meant it completely. "This is exactly where we're supposed to be." In the distance, Seraphine's song echoed through the tunnels, calling other dragons to safety and humans to understanding. The sound carried hope into the darkness, promising that even the most broken things could learn to fly again.